What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. It is day 2 of the Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. Day 1 of players and prospects being at the podium. So we talked to defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, edge rushers, linebackers here today. We're going to give you our top takeaways, maybe some guys who we were really impressed with, who we're maybe going to be moving up our personal big boards. Plus, there's a lot of NFL news, as there often is this week. We're going to talk Jaire Alexander, Harold Landry, Matthew Stafford, some potential trade destinations with those guys. It becoming public that those guys have been given the ability to seek some trades. Max Chadwick, Dalton Wasserman, Trevor Sikkema here with you guys. Fellas, how are we doing today?
Fantastic. Look, I think, again, now we get to see what the players have to say at these podiums, get a little bit of a feel for their personalities. And I always love asking them just about the finer details of their game, right? Especially when you think about there's so many discussions, especially about this defensive line class, about what types of players they are and what their skill set is. And I think it's just fascinating to see that come from a first-person perspective.
I'm feeling all right. You know, my diet has never been worse here in Indianapolis, so I'm kind of going through it.
You probably never had more protein, though.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. It's just,
as in like chicken wings. Like
sure,
that's
absolutely.
the protein I'm getting in there. But no, I feel all right. I'm really pumped to talk to these players, and I think that's really, like Dalton says, a really cool part of this whole experience. It's like getting these guys one-on-one, and it's so cool. Like one podium you have in All-American, next podium All-American, next podium All. It's like these guys that Dalton and I talk about as like the superstars in college football. All of them were in one convention center in Indianapolis. I think it's a really cool experience.
And it's a really good just defensive line group overall. So it was cool to see a lot of these guys and just wonder, hey, what's going to be that little edge that maybe separates these guys from one another, from being, pick number 15 in the draft and just picking a random number, not saying the Atlanta Falcons specifically, but like them versus maybe something 25, 28, something like that. And so a lot of these guys were able to sort of showcase that here to the media, and they do that to NFL teams as well. I want to shout out Dalton because he is a company man right now. He's supporting the brand. He's got the PFF hat and the PFF quarters.
I got one on too.
Yeah, but you don't have the hat too.
I don't have a hat.
I don't have anything. I guess we're in progression.
He doesn't do hats as often as I do.
Well, look, you're supporting the brand, which we really appreciate. If you guys out there want to support the brand, please like and subscribe to the video. We would love for you to do that. We're going to be having all sorts of great content here for you, whether it's on this channel or social throughout the week. So make sure you like and subscribe to the show if you guys are watching. We would really appreciate it. I do want to start in the pro market, though, because I think everybody's always fiending for the scoops, the information, the takes on where some of these guys might be going that are already in the NFL. So we're going to get to some of these great defensive linemen and why we loved some of what we heard here at the Combine. But I feel like the big news of the day, Harold Landry being given the opportunity to seek a trade, permission to talk to other teams from the Tennessee Titans. Jaire Alexander, the corner from the Green Bay Packers, also being given the ability to seek a trade there. Now, I want to start with Jaire Alexander, just get your guys' overall thoughts on it. I think Jaire is an incredibly talented football player, one of the best corners in the NFL, certainly when he's been healthy, but he's only played 7 games in each of the last 2 seasons, respectively. He's got 2 years left on his contract. He's only 28 years old, and so this is still somebody who, if you believe that he's about to have a fully healthy season upcoming, there's going to be plenty of teams that are interested. Your thoughts on Jaire hitting the market from a Packers perspective, and then also maybe some potential landing spots for him?
I think as far as the Packers goes, it's very interesting because, look, they already have needs at very key spots, right? Their offensive line, their defensive line, possibly another receiver. And now if you're going to trade away Jaire Alexander, it adds another need at another premium position that we could be talking about even going towards the draft, what they could be using their first-round pick on, right? Is it a corner, maybe like, I don't know, a Jahdae Barron or a Siobhan Ravel or somebody like that? Just adds to a list of needs that I think is longer than you might expect for a team that's made the postseason the last 2 years. And look, the rest of the depth of their cornerback room is not great, right? You got Keyshawn Nixon moving back and forth inside and outside, guys like Carrington Valentine who aren't considered elite players. So if Alexander is gone, and I know it's always a gamble with his health nowadays, but if he is gone, you don't have an elite presence at corner either on a team with several other needs.
I was going to say corner might have been one of their biggest needs even with Jaire Alexander. And you mentioned, yes, he's been banged up over the last couple of years, but when he's on the field, he's at top 25 PFF grades in each of the last 3 seasons. Now, I think the interesting part about it is the whole cap part of it, because The Packers, if they trade him, would take on $18 million in dead cap and only save about $6.8 million if they trade him away. So they would take on a lot of dead cap by trading away Jair Alexander, but any contender that needs a corner like the Steelers, the Bills, Gordon McGinnis wants me to say the Ravens as well.
Right.
Listen, Jair Alexander played with Lamar Jackson at Louisville. They're very good friends, obviously. So that's an option there in Baltimore.
Good pull.
But yeah, I think Jair Alexander, he's still a very, very good corner. Yeah, he's been banged up, but he's still one of the top 15 corners in the NFL.
I think there's some hoops to jump through with Jair and sort of you having to be okay with, if we trade him, we're going to take on some salary cap or some dead cap. But it also does feel like the Packers are really frustrated. Like they're really frustrated that he has not been there for them over the last couple of seasons in the way that they would want him to. So I almost feel like it's more likely than not he's not on the Packers next year. And I do, shout out to our content director, Gordon, who it feels like every single time that a player comes available on the pro market, he goes, no, he's a Raven. He's gonna be a Raven. I actually think that this one does make sense because getting Jair Alexander that Brandon Stevens, he's a free agent for them, so it would allow them to push Marlon Humphrey to the outside again, have a really good guy in the slot, or shoot, you could get versatile with those guys playing both inside and out, and then you got Nate Wiggins to play on the outside as well. I like the call out with the Buffalo Bills, potentially even the Washington Commanders. That's a team that has the ability to take on his cap space. If you get Jair Alexander, it gives you a lot of flexibility with how you're using Mike Sainer still as well. So those are some landing spots that I like. Dalton, any other spot other than the ones that we kind of mentioned here that you would like for this team?
Two that I think about are out in the NFC West. I think one is the Rams, although we don't really know where they stand in contention, with another topic with Matt Stafford and that potential trade. And two, the Arizona Cardinals, I think, would be an interesting one. They need some talent at that outside cornerback spot. They need to figure out their defensive line. Likely in this draft is where they're going to attack that. But I think Alexander would really help them too.
Yeah. I'm looking at his contract right now. It's pretty extensive when it comes to cap hits. Like it's a $24 million cap hit this year. It's a $27 million cap hit the year after. But he doesn't have any guaranteed money on his current deal over those 2 years. So the thought process, I'm sure, is with him being 28 years old right now, you're trading for him and then hopefully signing him to some sort of an extension on top of that to move that money around a little bit and get a little bit creative there. So I don't think that his current contract makes him untradeable there, but the value also gets a little bit weird. I still think Jair's a really good football player when he's healthy. So I even wonder if you can get a second-round pick for him. Maybe a third-round pick's probably more comfortable, but that's sort of the value that I think of right away for him.
The injuries make it tough. Was Marshawn Lattimore traded for a third-round pick? I believe it was during the season.
I think so.
It might be something comparable to that. And Lattimore, Washington traded for him with an injury with his hamstring already, and he barely even played for them until the postseason. But I think the injuries play a big part in that value. If you were to get him for 17 games and guarantee that, you might be talking about a more premium pick, like you said. But the injuries are the real problem here.
Yeah, it was Marshawn Lattimore. It was a third-round pick, a fourth-round pick, and a sixth-round pick, but then Lattimore and a fifth kind of went back to him, so it was a little bit of a pick swap there at the very end, but essentially like a third round and some change value there. So I think that's what we're talking about. Now I want to move on to Harold Landry next, because Landry is a player who also has been given permission to seek a trade there. Landry also has 2 years left on his deal. He is 29 years old. He had the ACL tear 3 years ago, but now he's had 2 years where he's had pretty good production again. He had 12 sacks before the ACL tear. Tears ACL, misses the entire season 3 years ago, but then back-to-back years, 10.5 sacks, 9 sacks this past season. He is somebody who is still clearly pretty dang productive, and if you need a pass rusher, him being available, I think makes sense to go after.
And a career-high 70.5 PFF grade this last year. You mentioned all the sacks and the pass rush and production, but he also used the 5th best run defense grade among all edges in the NFL this past season. And for a Tennessee Titans team that only has 2 top 100 picks, a number 1 overall pick in the draft and a second-round pick, they could try to add another top 100 pick by trading away Harold Landry. I don't know if he'll get a third-round pick in return.
I think he would. I think there's too many teams that need pass rushers,
it's
right?
True, right.
Detroit Lions, Washington Commanders, Buffalo Bills even. Like, I think there's a lot of teams that could use pass rushers. The guy, Quinn behind the camera is pointing. I would assume he wants me to shout out the Cincinnati Bengals.
He's doing the Gordon thing. He's like, he's a Bengal.
I don't know if I believe the Bengals would do that, so I kind of don't think of the Bengals in that regard, but maybe Quinn is saying that they should. So those are a couple of teams that come come to my mind when it comes to Harold Landry as well.
Yeah, I think even a team we just talked about in the Green Bay Packers as well. They need some edge help as well. We've talked about them maybe going in the draft and doing that. But I think anytime you can beef up the pass rush, right? We've seen it with the Eagles and several of these other teams where you go, okay, if the deeper our pass rush is and the further in the rotation that we have those guys, or if it's an early down player who's a great run defender, that helps too. And then you can keep your situational pass rushers in those situations. So there's going to be a market for Landry. The only thing that I wonder if it's a little bit tempered because of the really deep defensive line class that we have in this draft.
That's a great point. Yeah, no, it's a great point. He's got 2 years left on his deal as well. The cap hits go up from him. It's basically $24 million in each of the next 2 seasons. But again, zero guaranteed money on the deal.
Yeah.
So if you're trading for him, you're probably trying to figure out a way where maybe you can add a year or 2 onto that. Maybe make it the last contract that he's signing at a very high level, and you're just moving the money around when it comes to that cap space.
And for Tennessee, this makes their edge need that much greater.
Right.
Which we'll talk about the guy in a second, but Abdul Carter potentially going number 1 overall in the draft. With this news coming out, this is starting to look pretty good for him to go number 1.
Yeah, you want to host?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
He's so used to it,
No, it was good. It was brilliant. It was a brilliant transition setting it up here. So let's talk about it. Abdul Carter, one of many defensive linemen that talked here in Indianapolis at the scouting combine, and the dude just looks built for a defensive lineman. Like, with him playing off-ball linebacker, I remember watching him at the beginning of the season going through summer scouting. I was like, God, he's going to be light for an edge rusher. And I was like, it's going to take him a little bit of time. You look at him at the podium, thick neck. I mean, like, the dude is he's ready to play defensive line. And obviously he was fantastic in his first year as an edge rusher. But it does bring up an interesting point with the Titans telling their top edge rusher, hey, you can seek a trade somewhere else. We're okay moving on without you. It's a coincidence. I think it's no coincidence that they pick number 1 overall. And right now, Abdul Carter has the second highest odds to go number 1 overall behind only Cam Ward. So, Max, I will start with you. Your thoughts on Carter at the podium, your thoughts on just how he was answering questions, everything like that. Give the people a little bit of a sneak peek into kind of what you thought about him and then him going number 1 overall.
I think the Micah Parsons comparison is perfect. Obviously, they both went to Penn State, both started off at linebacker, both wore number 11, both were freakish athletic pass rushers who excelled at that role. And also, both of them extremely confident football players. That was the whole talk of the town at Abdul Carter's podium.
Does Carter have a podcast yet?
He will.
Okay, he will.
He
is
electric.
That's an important part of the Micah Parsons comp.
Someone was like, should you be the number 1 overall pick in the draft? He goes, well, I'll put it this way. I'm the best player in the country, and the best player in the country should be the number 1 overall pick. So I should be the number 1 overall pick. He is as confident as they come. I think Abdul Carter, I love the Micah comp. I think he is easily one of the 5 best players in this year's draft. And now with Tennessee, if they do trade Harold Landry, they'll have Arden Key and not much else in that edge room. I think Abdul Carter could very possibly be the first edge rusher taken number 1 since Jalon Walker.
But they do have an excellent defensive tackle room when you talk about Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat. So now you're really talking about completing a defensive line with a piece that they don't have. They don't have a speed rusher like Carter in there, right? And I think what gets lost sometimes with these elite pass rushers is not just as talented as they are, and we know he's the best pass rusher in this draft, but the value that they bring. You bring up Parsons as the comp, right? When Parsons came back from injury this season, I believe it was in Week 10, from there to the end of the season, the Cowboys as a team had the highest pass rush grade in the league. Obviously, Parsons plays a huge part in that, but the matchup problems you can create across the defensive line, we have someone that talented on the edge, it's really a schematic advantage as well as a talent one. So, look, Carter, Brian Callahan yesterday was asked as many questions about edge defenders and Abdul Carter as he was about quarterbacks. It really feels like this is a 50-50 proposition right now. If he feels like Carter is the best player in the draft and they can find a solution, even a temporary one at quarterback, then an edge defender is going to make their defense a whole lot better because they already have a pretty good interior group.
That quote that you were mentioning, the full quote was, all the teams that have won Super Bowls, they have that one standout player. I feel like I'm that. I feel like I'm the best player in the country, and the best player should be picked first. So very confident from him. Unfortunately, we won't get to see him work out because he is still recovering from that shoulder injury. So this was Abdul Carter's highlight of his week, if you will, us getting to kind of ask him questions. And, he talked about some guys that he models his game after. He talked about Myles Garrett. He talked about Von Miller, some of the very best in that regard. Micah Parsons was like his number 1 edge rusher. When they told him, rank your edge rushers in the class, he had Micah Parsons at number 1. I figured that he was going to.
So there's a guy at Penn State who used to play for Penn State offensive lineman, Landon Tangwall. He's a great job in the media nowadays, but he told a story about Abdul Carter one day. He said he wore number 11 at Penn State as a true freshman, which if you don't know, that is a very famous number. LeVar Arrington, obviously Abdul Carter, and a lot of very good players wore that number. Right after Michael left is when Abdul got in. Tangwall said for his first practice, he pancaked him. And he said when he pancaked him, "You ain't no Micah Parsons." He said 2 weeks later, Abdul Carter destroyed him on a rep, looked down on him, and said, "Yeah, I am." And so he's like, from then on, he's been a superstar. So he is, like I said, I think he's the most confident player in the draft. I love that confidence out of him. Yeah, he is a superstar.
Really quick, if you were the Titans, would you take him at 1 over a quarterback?
That's so hard to say before free agency. I mean, right this minute, I would probably still take a quarterback. But if we get into free agency and they feel like, okay, could Sam Darnold be a solution there? Is Brian Callahan happy with that? Could it be a one-year option like a Jameis Winston or a Justin Fields? I think we're going to have a lot more clarity on this, 2-3 weeks from now. But I would probably still lean towards a quarterback. You need a quarterback, but I completely understand, especially with their needs on the edge, how much Carter would help them.
I probably would take a quarterback too. I'd probably go with Shedeur Sanders. But it's hard to pass on a guy like Abdul Carter or even a Travis Hunter as well. So Mike Borgon's even said it. He said, because there was a quote out there saying, "We won't pass on a generational talent." And they asked him, how many generational talents are there in this draft? And he goes, "A few of them." So he likes a lot of players in this class. So it might be possible they trade down from number 1 overall as well. Because like I said, they only have 2 top 100 picks. So yeah, I would take a quarterback as well if they stick at number 1. But Abdul Carter is definitely a option.
I think I'd take Travis Hunter over Abdul Carter, but I think that is right there in that conversation.
That's also an option, and we heard yesterday what they think of him too. I mean, you're talking about special football players with Carter and Hunter that make that decision much harder.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to another player, Jalon Walker from Georgia. There's been a lot of talk with him throughout the draft season. He's been lower on my big board versus consensus because for a long time if he's listed as a linebacker, I don't really love his linebacker tape. I don't really love his feel in coverage. If he's listed as an edge rusher, okay, I see that a lot more. I see the higher return on investment, the fruits of what his talents can bring as an edge rusher, but is he really built like an edge rusher? Not so sure we're going to be able to see him test this week. I feel like I heard a rumor that he might not be testing this week, and so that would be a bummer. But he was asked sort of about his defensive position and where he's going to play. He's a linebacker, he's an edge rusher, and we got a little bit of a quote there from him when he was at the podium. Take a listen.
A lot of teams want me to still be in that position of playing multiple positions for their club, so I'm excited for it.
So later he said, "I'm a ball player. My favorite position is being on the field." And you love to hear that. And to be honest, his background with his dad being a longtime coach and just being a coach's kid, and he was just so professional, and I loved how thoughtful all of his answers were. You could tell he wasn't just answering these questions to try to get out of his podium session. He was genuinely answering them because there are a lot of questions that he's even had before, right? Like, oh, what's your favorite position? Who do you watch? Who do you model your game after? What's your go-to pass rush move? How do you see yourself fitting in defense? Like, these are all questions that it felt like with his answers, he has asked himself these questions before. So he's very comfortable and confident asking those questions coming from being a coach's kid. So what do you guys think of Jalon Walker today and sort of where you think he is in the class?
Look, I think that versatility, it's gonna be a lot of opinions about it, right? Because he kind of mentioned it. His versatility is one of his weapons, right? His ability to play linebacker, even in the slot, some in coverage, off of the edge. I think you're going to have a dynamic where some teams think he's going to be kind of a converted edge, right? He's going to go down there and do that full time, and maybe be a year behind the Abdul Carter curve, right? As a converted linebacker, or is he kind of that middle of the field joker in your defense where you can do it either way, kind of in the same way that, say, the Commanders use Frankie Louvu, or even the Eagles at times use Zach Bond, moving him up off of the edge with his prior experience doing that. Is there a hybrid role for him there, or is he going to move to the edge? And I'm sure all 32 teams have a different opinion on that, but if he feels like the versatility is a weapon, I think he's going to continue to try to convince the scouts and GMs that he can do all of it.
Yeah, I think he commanded the podium just as much as Abdul Carter did, like in a completely different way as well. I thought his answers were fantastic, and I love that answer of, all right, where should you play in the NFL? He goes, dude, I just want to play in the NFL, right? I just want to get on the field in the NFL. So that's awesome. And the fact that he mentioned, hey, my versatility, I'm not, like you mentioned before, there's guys that are versatile, and then there are guys that are homeless. And he's like, I can play anywhere. So I think, I really like Jalon Walker. Again, I'm not as high as the top 10, top 5 height like we've seen very respected draft analysts have him as, but I still think he's worth a shot, maybe somewhere late in the first round, early second round.
Seems like a lot of people in the chat also agree. We got a couple of people who are shouting him out as an edge rusher, 3-4 outside linebacker edge type of a player where you could be a little bit of stand-up. You could drop him back into coverage a little bit if that's sort of what you want there. Pickett Spreads says Jalon Walker, Hassan Reddick comp. Better athlete, but I still like the comp there. Thoughts overall? I mean, that's a linebacker pass rusher hybrid type of player.
I think that's reasonable. I know you've brought up Zaven Collins before too, also from the Cardinals.
A little bigger,
a little bit, yeah. I think it's going to depend on the team, the defense, whichever defensive coordinator has the idea that, okay, is he an edge guy? Am I just going to blitz him a lot on passing downs? Are there certain ways that we can manipulate the personnel to maybe get him even in a 4-man rush with other coverage players behind him? A player who has that kind of positional fluidity like that can allow you to do a lot of different things. We see that in Kansas City. Steve Spagnuolo is the best at it. He's got so many guys for one specific role, right? And a guy like Walker who can do a little bit of everything allows you to do that more often.
Hey, and I see in the chat, Joe, he's on the opposite side of it. He said, look, Isaiah Simmons was billed as a defensive chess piece too, right? And you talked about being versatile versus being homeless. He ended up being homeless, not really having that home base position that he could go to in the NFL, and he kind of got lost a little bit here. Joe says he's probably a second-round edge rusher, but will need some work from Jalon Walker is what he is mentioning there. I feel like I'm a little bit closer to that, although I was just really impressed with who he is and how he talked to the podium. It makes me feel like even if a team that originally drafts him maybe plays him out of position, plays him more as an off-ball linebacker. Maybe it is a failure of an experiment, and he could go to a different team, and they go, no, we've seen you as an edge rusher the whole time. We're going to have you play an edge rusher. To me, just the way that he carried himself, even in a short podium session, made me feel as though whatever coaching he's going to get at any point in his career, he's going to take to it, and he's going to be able to be the best version of whatever he's asked to be.
Exactly.
So that is something that gives me a little bit of faith that it's worth drafting high.
I think Dalton put it really well. You hope he's on the Abdul Carter curve, right, where he's the projection where Abdul, of course, played linebacker. I mean, we had Abdul pretty low in our initial big board for the draft because we're like, we haven't seen him play edge before, but he has the tools to do so.
We had him going in the 20s as maybe a late first or early second round pick. Going, we think he could get even higher than this, and we mentioned that part too. Like, hey, he could be a top 5 or 10 player, but we just need to see it, right? We didn't get to see that full time at Georgia with Jalon.
Yeah.
We got another comment in the chat here saying, now when I see Jihad Campbell, the other linebacker, I see a weapon to be used like Zach Bond, mostly at linebacker, but you could plug him into some edge roles when he is needed. I also was really impressed with Jihad Campbell's podium. I thought he was very genuine. I thought he showed some personality. He was very passionate. You could tell that this is a guy who wants to be great at what he does, and he was even sort of attacking questions, and not aggressively, but I'm saying his answers, and he was very much listening to what somebody would say. For example, one of the first questions that he was asked was somebody was talking about how the linebacker position was coming back into vogue, and he kind of went on for the rest of the question, and then and Campbell was like, whoa, hold on, what do you mean? Clarify that. I want to understand what you're exactly trying to say here. And so he wasn't just sitting back at this podium and kind of letting again, trying to get out of his 15 minutes that he had to answer things from the podium. He was there, he was present, he was genuine. And then his answer to that question was very much linebackers today, especially the ones like me, can do a lot of different things. So it makes sense why the NFL and other NFL teams would be able to value them. So I really liked Jihad Campbell's as well. I think that those linebackers are guys who are really climbing and are going to impress a lot of teams this week. We got another question in the chat from Ben that I wanted to shout out and hear what you guys thought. What do you guys think of Carson Schweschinger saying that he's going to weigh in around 240? So listed at UCLA at 225. He's such great read and reaction, downhill speed, I shouldn't even say downhill speed. It's coverage speed as well, just overall athleticism. But he's always been playing at 225. So you say to yourself, of course he's going to be a little bit quicker. He's a little bit lighter. If he weighs in at 240 and he still runs like the wind, if you will, that is going to mean I think we're going to have a lot more linebackers in the top 60 than we originally projected.
The speed and the aggressiveness when he pulls the trigger is the number one thing that jumps off the tape, right? And you're talking about both on the defensive side, and I think even early in his career, depending on where he goes and how high he gets drafted, he'd be an excellent special teams player early on, too, for the way he just plays with his hair on fire. But if he maintains that level of speed and movement at 240 pounds, I think you are talking about a different type of player. I think the agility drills, even more so than, say, a 40-yard dash are going to show him that, right? Once, sometimes you get heavier and you just can't move laterally and turn your hips as quickly. If he can still do that at a bigger size, you're talking about a guy who's going to raise his stock.
Absolutely. And you mentioned playing with his hair on fire. Hopefully not, right? Because you tweeted out. He's got incredible.
It's a lot of hair.
He's got incredible.
It's a lot of hair.
He's got incredible. Flow.
Again, I walked up to his podium and I was like, "You told me he was going to be a left winger in the 2025 NHL draft.
Yeah.
I believe he looks like an NHL player. He really does. He's a little bit smaller. He's got the flowing blonde hair. I don't know, man. I just saw.
We got to get him in Washington with Ben Sinnott. He was a hockey player forever before college.
I mean, Ben Sinnott basically played every sport under the sun, though. Like Ben Sinnott played hockey, he played lacrosse, he played golf, he played
before
tennis.
Last year, I had never heard of a 6-sport athlete before Ben Sinnott.
That was Ben Sinnott.
And he said hockey was the main one. He was like, I was going to the NHL for sure, and I got too good at football, basically.
I wish I had that problem. Dude.
Big miracle guy.
That's a great problem.
Big miracle guy. The Texas A&M guys. I want to talk about Nick Scorton. I want to talk about Shamar Stewart. I want to talk about them a little bit. But let's focus on Nick Scorton first, because I was sitting by his podium and hearing him answer some questions. One in particular really stood out to me, and that was the question. It was like, hey, you were very productive when you were at Purdue. It really took a step back in that overall production when you were at Texas A&M. And he was able to talk about the differences of playing in both of those defenses. We've got the clip for you guys here. Take a look at that.
Coach wanted me to go and get after the quarterback. I drop in cover 2. I take man sometimes. It was very simple defense. I think when I got to A&M, we were in a very complex defense. I was playing both positions. There's a lot of different responsibilities for those. And, I think Coach Elko and that staff just really helped me learn more about football and, just showcase my versatility.
I wanted to get a chance to ask him what his playing weight was this year versus last year when he was at Purdue, but I did not get the chance to do that because I think that also sort of went into a lack of production that he had this year at Texas A&M. But he had that sort of versatility this year that was much different. He said at Purdue, it was very streamlined. I was just rushing from one spot. Yep. My job was very simple. It was just get after the quarterback. And you could tell he was very confident in doing that when he was at Purdue. He was not the same when he was at Texas A&M, and he sort of explained a little bit. My job was a lot different. I was playing on the left side and the right side. I was playing a 5 technique. I was playing a 4-eye along the defensive line. We're sometimes doing a lot more of the dirty work than he was asked to do when he was at Purdue. You guys' thoughts overall on Nick Scorton. What do you believe of this past year that we saw in 2024 versus what you saw in 2023?
I think it was a different defense with a different emphasis, too. And I think we kind of saw that with Shamar Stewart as well when he was one of the best run defenders in the country and still developing. I think, was it only 1.5 sacks this year, I think, for Stewart?
1.5 sack every year for the last 3 years. That was it.
I mean, Mike Elko has a major emphasis on stopping the run up front with those front four so he can get into all his complex coverages on the back end, right? And Scorton, he did play a big part of that, and his run defense grade was very high this year. And I thought as a pass rusher at Purdue, of course, coming right off of seeing this guy get drafted from Florida State, but I thought there was elements to Jared Verse in his game as a pass rusher. I mean, such a huge guy. I remember you bringing this up. Such a nasty spin move he had standing up out on the edge, and I think it's a different role and a different defense. And it's interesting because there's another guy I heard talk about something similar. Jared Ivey from Ole Miss today was talking about, the differences between playing inside and outside and that versatility, and then he even got into the detail of knowing, say, the coverage shell behind you, knowing the alleys, knowing where everybody is supposed to be and not just your own job, and having that versatility and being able to do different things helps you with that. I think that applies to Scorton here too.
So I wanted to look. So Scorton's answer really wanted me to look into Ultimate that we have more and see what his numbers were like. When he was at Purdue and when he was at Texas A&M. So at Purdue, he only spent 15 snaps with his hand in the dirt. At A&M, it was 163. And with his hand in the dirt at A&M this past year, 73 pass rushing grade. When he was standing up at Purdue, he had a 91 pass rushing grade. Mm-hmm. So I do think there's something to the Texas A&M defense. Again, like at Purdue, he was able to pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. With Texas A&M, it's more read and react to what was happening. It didn't really let him kind of unleash fully as a pass rusher. I don't think the Aggies really put Scorton, Stewart, and a bunch of other guys, Turner even too. I don't think they put him in the best position to make a lot of money in the NFL.
I remember he was my edge one going into the season. I was just disappointed by what we saw in 2024 because I thought it was going to be a lot more productive, and so I was down on him during the season and the end of the season. But now that I'm really thinking about more of the context and certainly hearing what he said here at the podium, I wonder if I'm not going to have him, somewhere around my top 3 edge rushers when it's all said and done, and sort of get back to like, hey, you know what? The guy that was at Purdue is sort of still in there. And maybe that best version of both, a more versatile run defender at Texas A&M and the pass rusher that we saw at Purdue, is actually going to manifest itself into the NFL. And if that's the case, he should be talked about as, maybe edge 2, edge 3, edge 4 in this class, something like that. So look for Nick Scorton to maybe be a riser out of this week. I figured that was just a good shout out there. We got a lot of really great questions and opinions that we're seeing in the live chat right now. We'll get to those throughout the show. Brody is asking, what'd you guys think about Danny Stutzman? Were you by Stutzman's podium? Did you get to listen to him at all?
Yeah, a little bit. He talked a lot about just the difference. I thought something that was interesting was the difference for Oklahoma moving to the SEC this year as opposed to the Big 12. Jalon Walker mentioned this too. Going through that SEC gauntlet, and SEC players seem like they're always a little bit more coveted when it comes to the NFL draft, right? Because they go through that gauntlet. They play other NFL caliber talent all the time, right? Especially in conference play. That was an interesting bit from Stutzman for me. It's just that jump in that level of competition and still having a pretty good season, at least defensively, for Oklahoma.
Yeah. Oh, man, it feels like the chat is – a lot of people in the chat are really skeptical about Shamar Stewart. Just what he is going to be as an NFL player. The lack of production seems to scare a lot of people. And it worries me a little bit too. Production is not everything. And I'll say this, standing next to Shamar Stewart – massive human being. I mean, like alien-like build. He really is just a physical specimen when it comes to playing the game of football at the pro level. So, checks all of the size boxes. There is no doubt about it. But I do kind of worry about that lack of polish with him. And he's only a true junior, and he's young, and I understand that. But I am less likely to just believe that a guy is going to get better once he gets to the pros. Because it's not just, they're getting older. Like, the prospects will get a little bit older, they'll get better. The competition gets a lot harder. And I know he's coming from the SEC, and the SEC's got a lot of talent, but it's not like Shamar Stewart's going to come out and, at least I don't think, 7, 8, 9 sacks in his rookie year. He never had that in college. Why would you think that's going to happen in his NFL career? It might be year 3, year 4 before this guy really figures it out as a pass rusher.
I think it could be. Yeah, I'm a little bit lower on Shamar Stewart as well. Now, the one thing was I had him as a second-round talent before the Senior Bowl. He was the best player at the Senior Bowl. So now I do think he's worthy of being a first-round pick in this draft. But I'm with you. I'm a big part of my scouting process is how productive you were in college, because it is obviously it's a big jump in competition getting to the NFL, obviously. So I'm with you that all the tools are there, and he was outstanding at the Senior Bowl, but those production concerns at least, and we talked about before with Nick Scorton, like maybe at A&M he wasn't able to be fully unleashed. At least with Scorton, though, we saw him be incredibly productive at Purdue.
Yep.
I have some questions with Shamar Stewart.
What do you think?
I think a lot of times when you're looking at a guy's flaws, and in this case pass rush production, the scouts are going to ask themselves, are the flaws coachable? Are we able to fix that? Or is it an issue of, something athletically or not being explosive or twitched up enough, right? Is he physically unable to do these things and he's forever just going to be a big-bodied run stopper, which we know he can do. He's very, very good at that. His value as a run defender alone makes him damn near an NFL starter. Now you're talking about trying to add that pass rush potential. Are those problems coachable? Or is there something in his game that they're going to find that they say, you know what, he's just not going to be an A-plus pass rusher like that?
Drake, who's always in the chat, big draft dude, always getting his draft takes out, which we absolutely love on these shows. He's saying that he likes Jared Ivey more than he likes Shamar Stewart.
Wow.
These similar players who are these just like bigger defensive ends, maybe 3-4 defensive ends or 5 technique 4-3 defensive ends. And he's saying that he likes Ivey a little bit better. The thing that worries me about Ivey, and I think that Ivey's a good football player, I really do, I don't know if he has the juice to be a true 4-3 defensive end to really threaten the outside shoulder with speed enough. Now, I love Ivey as like a 3-4 defensive end.
Yeah.
I think he's big enough. I think he's strong enough. I think he's a true NFL player in that regard. But I do think that Stewart at least gives you that juice, at least that potential to be an outside pass rusher when it comes to those responsibilities. Joe V is saying, look at Walter Nolan. Had 5 sacks in 2 years when he was at Texas A&M.
Yep.
6 sacks last year with Ole Miss. The A&M scheme doesn't do these guys any favors. The coaching staff was different from when Walter Nolan was there versus what we saw from Mike Elko's defense with the 2 guys this year. But it is something that it's at least worth a shout out to look into. And I think it is a little bit different because I think Nolan got a lot better as a football player this past year at Ole Miss. But it's a new spot that he got better as a football player. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there is something to A&M scheme, maybe just along their defensive line. They like their defensive line to maybe be less pass rushers, less production from them, more production out of the guys behind him, and keeping those guys like Torian York and all those the linebackers free.
Yeah, he played a lot more nose tackle, I noticed, at Ole Miss than he did at Texas A&M, and he thrived in that role with the Rebels. So I think there is something to that. And that was a big problem with the Jimbo Fisher era at Texas A&M was, they literally had the greatest recruiting class of all time. Walter Nolan was a part of it. I believe Shamar Stewart was a part of that as well. They had 8 5-stars in that class, and they still struggled. Player development was a big problem. Now, I think it's a massive improvement with Mike Elko there, because that's really what made him such a great coach at Duke, was that they didn't get great recruits, and yet they turned them into really good football players.
Yeah.
So it's improving there at A&M, but yeah, you're starting to see with Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart, even Nick Scorton this past year, they're still kind of getting along on the defensive line.
We're going to talk some quarterbacks here in a second before we get to who our most impressive players were today in day one with the guys here at the podium. But before we get to that, this podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Cherry Bundy, the performance drink that's fueling the healthy revolution. No matter what kind of an active lifestyle you have, whether you were just getting some steps in around the neighborhood or whether you're training for a marathon, Cherry Bundy's got the products that'll help you perform your best. Made with natural products and natural ingredients, no added sugars, those tart cherries that they are made with. It's the highest antioxidant fruit and vegetable in the world. It means it's got all sorts of great benefits. Anti-inflammatory for reducing soreness, increased recovery. They also help with supporting immunity, naturally occurring melatonin to help you sleep a little bit more. It's used by the very best. 500 collegiate and professional sports teams use their products. Every single NFL team that was traveling overseas in Europe and Brazil had this product to help them recover and just feel and play their best. They've got all sorts of stuff. They've got stuff designed to help you sleep a little bit better, stuff that'll give you a little bit more energy, stuff that will help you recover a little bit more. Check out the products over at Amazon. Retailers nationwide as well, so check the Publix, the Kroger, whatever is around you. You can see if they have it there. Or if you want to go to cherrybundy.com, you can get 20% off whatever your order is by using the promo code PFF20. So once again, whatever kind of active lifestyle you have and whatever kind of aid you need in sort of recovery and just performing your best, you can get 20% off your first order at cherrybundy.com by using the promo code PFF20. All right, let's talk a little quarterbacks here. We were live yesterday at 3 p.m. Chris Ballard, the general manager of the local Indianapolis Colts, didn't go to his podium session until later in the day. He was a little bit later. And he did have something that was very interesting to say, and that is that the Colts are likely to bring in a quarterback that they will have some sort of an open competition with Anthony Richardson. Now, this is the first time that he has really been this open, saying it like that, and I want to be fair to Chris Ballard because he says, quote, it's got to be the right guy to create real competition, but we want to create real competition. I think that's good for the team. I think that's good for Anthony. We drafted Anthony high, knowing that he was going to take some time. We knew there were going to be some hiccups along the way. We all know that we want a finished product right now. I do, you do, the fans do, we all do. But I think as he continues to progress in his young career, us adding competition, I think, will help raise everybody's game. It's just a different way that they have talked about the quarterback position to this point. And I think when you look at Richardson, where he is entering this season, 1 year as a starter at the University of Florida, barely played his rookie season because he missed most of it due to injury. Last year, you had him going through injury. You had the tap out. You had him getting benched. You had him coming back. He still just has not started a lot of games.
Even in high school, I believe.
He just has not started a lot of football games. Yeah. But there's no doubt about it. You don't have forever in the NFL.
Yeah.
This is a make or break year for Anthony Richardson, and I figured that they would bring in some sort of new quarterback presence. But Dalton, as somebody who has been skeptical of Richardson, open competition is just a phrase in the setup that we have not heard yet from the Indianapolis Colts.
Right, and it makes me wonder how much of a cap almost is there on bringing in a level of competition. Let's even just say, would they be somebody who gets involved in the Matt Stafford rumors and you go, okay, well then the competition's over because Matt Stafford's your quarterback. Could it be Sam Darnold? Well, if he gets something like a 3-year, $100 million contract, well, Sam Darnold's going to be your quarterback. So I think about on the veteran market first when you talk about guys like Jameis Winston, who's fishing to compete for a starting job. He's mentioned that out loud if he could cut down the turnovers, which can also be an issue already in Indianapolis. Justin Fields, I think about, who's looking for a 1 or maybe even a 2-year opportunity to be somebody's starter, right? A cheaper option that really can compete, push Richardson for that starting job, maybe even win the starting job if they are the best quarterback. And the issue with Richardson also, even when he is healthy, it's just the struggle to complete passes. You have to be able to complete passes at least a minimum amount. And he's been below that minimum. He was below that at Florida, and it's still the accuracy issues are the problem there.
Yeah, I think the two that you mentioned right there, and Justin Fields and Jameis Winston, seem like the most likely to me, because if you sign Sam Darnold, if you sign Russell Wilson, or if you sign Aaron Rodgers or trade for Matthew Stafford, like, that is your quarterback. And I think Chris Ballard and the Colts still want Anthony Richardson to be their quarterback of the future. Maybe it's just trying to light a fire under his ass, honestly, bringing in a guy like Justin Fields or Jameis Winston. So those guys would be a lot cheaper than the other guys that Dalton mentioned. So I think those two are the ones I'm looking at first. But, yeah, it's definitely interesting, to say the least, going to his third year.
I don't hate Jameis Winston or Justin Fields being added to this team. Yeah. I really do think that is a solid way to go about it if you're the Indianapolis Colts, because if it fails, whether Richardson fails or any of the other quarterbacks there, then you're just absolutely all in, and you're probably turning the page from everything anyways. Yeah. I don't know if Shane Steichen's going to be gone, but certainly I think Chris Ballard's going to be gone if it really does not work out with any of the quarterbacks that they're laying all their cards on the table for, whether it's Anthony Richardson or whoever's going to start most of the games for them this year. Charles says open competition with Aaron Rodgers.
That's another one. I think
AR versus AR there.
But I think Rodgers actually could go there and succeed, considering all the weapons in their offense. And the other thing I think about too, I don't think, look, they're not going to take a quarterback in the first round, because if you do it again, well, you're handing Richardson's job, I think, to somebody else. But I think about some of these mid-round guys that could go between rounds 3 and 5. Riley Leonard, Dylan Gabriel, Will Howard, Kyle McCord, I think would be a good fit in their offense too. I wonder if you start talking about, maybe even that's a third guy you talk about. Get a Jameis Winston, you have AR, and then maybe you'd spend a 4th or 5th round pick on one of these guys.
Anthony Richardson light and Jalen Milroe maybe in the 3rd or 4th round.
See, if I just
no, you're not gonna do that.
I was going to say,
well,
I don't like just lining up the same archetype. I feel like you get somebody different.
Listen, imagine a quarterback room with Richardson, Fields, and Milroe.
That's
a 4x1 team is what that is.
It's just put all three of them back there. Yeah. All three of them have their hands out to get the snap, and they're just like running
a full house backfield with those three and Jonathan Taylor. We're living now.
Yeah, there you go. Some would say that's bringing football back.
I would run the ball
we're accelerating it 1,000 years.
Triple option. Let's go.
This is some stuff that I would do in Madden right here.
Bamulson saying Kenny Two Gloves going to Indianapolis. Maybe Kenny Pickett,
Super Bowl champion. Kenny Pickett.
Yeah. Played in the Super Bowl.
Still giving Richardson a chance to win the job. He would have that against a Brissett or a Winston or a Fields. That's why it's weird when you talk about the veteran options with this team, or even Aaron. Now, Rodgers, I think, would still be an upgrade over Richardson. Yeah. But even then, he's got to go in there, and you're talking about a 40-plus-year-old guy. And, well, he's been playing next to Joe Flacco already in Indy, and Flacco at times has looked better than he has. So I think they have a lot of options, but I don't think it's going to be premier options. He's still going to have a chance to win the job.
Donnie's saying in the chat, what do you guys think about what do you think the Raiders end up doing at QB, which is sort of a good segue into what we were going to talk about next. Go ahead.
There is a breaking news story that literally just happened. Jordan Schultz just said that Tom Brady hosted Matthew Stafford at his ranch in Montana, and they went skiing together.
Wow.
Tom Brady,
it's over.
Minority owner of the Raiders.
It's over.
So he and Stafford were together.
So I was just about to say that, because I've also heard here in Indianapolis, we've talked about the Giants being a landing spot for Matthew Stafford, and from what I have heard, the Giants would love to be a landing spot for Matthew Stafford, but they actually don't think that they're the front runners for his services.
Did they take him skiing?
Think the Raiders are in the front for their services. I don't know. Apparently they're going to take him skiing. Well, I don't know. How do you one-up skiing? What's it, like a cruise? Like, what's next? An all-inclusive?
Anytime I hear about a ski trip or a golf trip, when you hear about a ski trip or a golf trip, you know something's getting real.
I think ski trip's more serious than a golf trip.
Yeah.
Golf trip, you could bring your own clubs. It's not that big of a deal. Ski trip, you got to,
that can be dangerous.
You got to get the Airbnb. You got to rent the equipment. You got to get the lift tickets. It's a whole ordeal for a ski.
That's change for Tom Brady.
But you're not. But I'm saying it takes a little bit of time. You're not just bringing anybody out to a ski trip. You know what I'm saying? You can bring anybody out to play golf.
It's Catalina wine mixer.
You're not just.
That was the first reference Dalton's
ever made. Good job, Dalton. Like Good job. We're really proud of you. You were really proud of you.
I watched one movie this year.
It's the top helicopter rental event on the Western Hemisphere. So Tom Brady's saying to Matthew Stafford. The landing spot's very interesting, because the Raiders, it feels like they're all in times where I don't think they should be an all in, right? Like, I don't think their secondary is that good. their defensive line was okay, but went through injuries. I mean, Christian Wilkins, they made the big splash there. He was hurt. I mean, Malcolm Kuntz was hurt this year. Divine Diablo's a free agent. Obviously, you have Max Crosby, but it's like, do you have the depth that you want there? The offensive line, I thought, was good. Outside of Brock Bowers, you don't have the receivers you want. You certainly don't have the run game that you want. So maybe you go get Matthew Stafford and things just really change and things are changing for you. I would think that Matthew Stafford would have rather gone to the Giants, but hey, maybe that's not the case. Maybe with Tom Brady there and looking at all the pull that he has as a minority owner, maybe the Raiders do get this thing turned around pretty quickly. What do you guys think?
Look, you got guys in Tom Brady and Pete Carroll and John Spytek now as their GM. First of all, they're all very optimistic. I think Pete Carroll's the most optimistic guy you'll ever see, right? And I think they know how to win. So they think this team is not as far off. And I find the Stafford thing for them interesting because now it completely tilts what we're going to talk about them with that 6th overall pick. That's not the 6th overall pick is not going to be given up for Matt Stafford. They're going to find a way to do it with other draft picks, and obviously they do have a lot of money to spend, right? So they do, if they get a quarterback and then maybe they fix up the secondary a little bit. You're talking about the scenarios now where we're talking Teterow and McMillan. You add that to a team with Stafford and Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers and a pretty good line. You're living Ashton Ginty. If we get there 6th overall, you got Stafford and a run game to work with.
If you sign Matthew Stafford, are we locking Ashton Ginty into 6?
Oh, it could be Tet.
It could be Tet too.
Because
it's fair.
If you have Stafford throwing to Tet, Myers, and Bowers, you are living.
I think they draft Ginty over Tet.
They probably would.
Maybe so. Last in the league in rushing. They had a historically bad running game last year. Ginty, to be balanced or to add that big X receiver like McMillan, I think that would put it much more on the table, both of those players, as opposed to a corner, because you could suddenly build a really great offense overnight the way Stafford can still throw the ball when he's protected.
I think it's worth mentioning still that Sean McVay recently went on what podcast did he go on recently? That
it was the one with, I don't know
Andrew
the name,
Whitworth,
but it was Andrew Whitworth and Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yes, but he went on and he said, listen, we want him back. Basically, the whole reason why they're letting Stafford do this is to see what his market is right now, because apparently, according to reports from Peter Schrager, Matthew Stafford wants $50 million a year in a new deal. And I don't know if the Rams are willing to do that right now. Obviously, he wants more of a long-term extension as well. I don't know if the Rams want to do that either.
I think they'd be willing to do it the way that McVay was speaking. And kudos to him. He was kind of as candid, genuine, and open as he could be, which was really cool. It seems as though what I gathered from that interview is that they don't mind paying Matthew Stafford that money maybe for 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
But if Stafford feels like he wants to play 3 or 4 years and he wants to obviously make top dollar doing it, I think that's where the Rams are saying, if you can get that somewhere else, we're okay with finding something that might make sense for you to go do that and for us to get a good return to rebuild the way that we want to. That was my takeaway from the Stafford situation.
And the Rams angle of it is just as interesting as where Stafford would be going, because then you sit here and you go, okay, who's their quarterback, right? They have a much lower first-round pick, having made the NFC divisional. It's not a deep quarterback class. Are they a team that maybe thinks about a Sam Darnold, who, even coming off the season he just has, would be significantly cheaper than Stafford? And Sean McVay talked about trying to balance the short-term and long-term here, but Stafford seeing what Kirk Cousins got in free agency last year going, hey, why am I not getting $100 million guaranteed when I may have more in the tank than Cousins did even coming out of last year in the Achilles tear?
I think the really interesting part about all this with the Rams is that you could convince yourself that the Rams were pretty close to making a run for the Super Bowl, right? They almost beat the Philadelphia Eagles in the divisional round. Maybe they beat the Commanders in the NFC title game.
I honestly think that if it does not snow in that game, I'm not trying to take anything away from the Eagles fans, but if that game does not snow, that's a lot closer down the stretch. And if the ball bounced the right way, Rams could have won that game.
And the Rams probably beat the Commanders in the next round, right?
I don't want to say probably. It would have been a damn good
game.
I think it would have been great.
He's up on QB1.
They would have been favored.
All right, I know. He's disrespecting Jaden Daniels.
And I think in the Super Bowl, listen, I know it's not as dominant as the Eagles defensive line, but I think the Rams D-line could have given the Chiefs a lot of problems too in the Super Bowl. So you could convince yourself through these scenarios the Rams weren't that far away. I'm just saying it's a lot of blowing up an entire team when you can convince yourself they weren't that far away from making a run.
Stetson Bennett redemption arc is what Drake said in the chat. I don't know if we're getting that.
Not so sure. He won 2 at Georgia.
That's right. He talked twice.
He talked twice. There's no doubt about it. The Stafford trade is going to be incredibly interesting to follow as this kind of develops, because it's hard for me to think that the Rams would want to move on with him. But Tom Brady, being somebody that is very clearly heavily involved in what goes on with the Las Vegas Raiders. They're going to want to get their quarterback sooner rather than later. All right, let's round this out by saying who impressed us the most today. Let's get back to the Combine here in Indianapolis and talk about some of those players that were at the podium and who we were impressed with. I'll start. Donovan Ezeraku, the edge rusher from Boston College. Not that I thought I was going to hear otherwise, but I just am so impressed every time I learn more about this young man and listen to him speak and how he approaches the game. He said that his playing weight was 247 this past year, and he feels like he could play comfortably at 255. Big win. Big win right there. I'm good with that. I just didn't want you to say 235 on me. As long as you're saying something around 245, I'm good to go with his play style as a stand-up outside rusher. But somebody asked him, like, hey, Donovan, what's your favorite rush move that you love to go to? And he was talking about a ghost rush move, and he starts breaking it down a little bit, but he's like, but you can't just do a ghost rush move. You know, what you've got to be able to do is you've got to be able to hit a couple of different moves first. You got to get the offensive linemen to be back on their heels. You've got to get them to open up their chest a little bit, so you've got to beat them to the outside first, and then you hit that ghost rush move as a full pass rush plan. And just the way that he went about this was so impressive to me. He understands the game so well. I love everything that I heard about Donovan Ezeraku, and he was already a top 10 edge rusher for me. I think we should talk about him as a back end of the first round edge rusher. I really do. So I was so impressed with Ezeraku and what I heard today.
A couple of things I think about.
I hope he tests well. I hope he tests well, because if he tests well, the limit does not exist of how high I'm going to put him in the next mock draft.
A couple of things stick out to me there. One is that all of that sounds a lot like what I heard from Leatu Latu last year, who went, 15th overall, I believe it was, to the Colts, and just having that plan and being just so cerebral about playing a position that a lot of people think doesn't take a lot of thinking. Okay, fill your gap, rush the quarterback. There's a lot more that goes into that, and you can see that multi-layered planning when you see him in sequence during games as a pass rusher. The other thing I keep thinking about, you mentioned late first-round pick. We'll go back to the Packers for a second. Who's their defensive coordinator? Jeff Hafley. Ezeraku's head coach at Boston College until this past year. Football's all about connections, and the Packers need an edge player, and Jeff Hafley knows him pretty darn well. So that's one of the places ideally late in the first round where I go, maybe a connection kind of gets him into Green Bay, but we'll see as it comes.
I'll stay with you, Dalton. Who impressed you the most today?
I was really impressed with Jack Kaiser, the linebacker from Notre Dame, and I think just so much kind of honest, thoughtful insight, both on his decision last year to come back to school, because in 2023 he was one of the highest graded linebackers in the country, but in kind of a rotational part-time role. I don't even think he hit 400 snaps that year. This year, coming back really as Notre Dame's middle linebacker, and there's several things that intrigued me about this. He talked about coming back and some of the advantages, and one of the things he mentioned was, as a linebacker, this was the first year where they had the green dot, the helmet communication in college football, and that was something that he said was one of the reasons he wanted to come back. Let me get used to being the green dot guy in a defense, in a defense that's calling plays through the helmet and calling it and then making the adjustments once the headset shuts off at 15 seconds. That was one thing. And then, another connection thing here, he had mentioned, somebody had asked him about Al Golden and how he had coached their defense the last 3 years. Obviously, Notre Dame making the title game on the strength of their defense and the run game. But there was a crack that he said about he saw Al Golden in the back here somewhere, and he was asking, he's like, hey, you guys, am I going to do an interview with the Bengals? And Golden just looks at him and goes, no, we know you well enough. I don't need to interview you, Jack. I've been around you for 3 years already. So Jack Kaiser, just a ton of great insight, both on the Notre Dame program, which I can get into on the college show, what he looks at the linebacker position and how he got ready really in a full-time role this year. And I think he's one of those guys, probably maybe, a borderline top 100 talent, but the way that he spoke at the podium, I think GMs and scouts are going to absolutely love him. I think he's going to be a day 2 pick.
And he should have a great combine, too.
Yeah.
He's a freak athlete. I think Jack Kaiser is definitely one of my favorite linebackers in this
Former
class.
Quarterback in high school, too.
The more we talk about this linebacker class, I think middle of the season, we were kind of grasping at straws. Yeah. We were like, man, Danny Stutzman, but he's not having a great year. And Barrett Carter from Clemson, but we've talked about him for a couple of seasons, and we were like, man, who's going to be LB1 in this class? Now we've got Jihad Campbell, Demetrius Knight, Carson Schweschinger, Chris Paul Jr. from Ole Miss, and now we talk about guys that you like in like Jack Kaiser, right? Cody Simon from Ohio State. It's like these linebackers kind of like coming out of the woodwork this year at the second half of the season and throughout the draft process. This linebacker group, this off-ball linebacker group, really, I think, is now underrated at this point. And a lot of people talked about it as the weakness of this draft. I don't think I would categorize it like that anymore.
No, it's a good linebacker class. You even mentioned Barrett Carter. I still think there's something there with Barrett Carter.
I do too.
He was really good a couple years ago. Yeah, he had a couple down years recently, but he's a really athletic player, could do everything. He could be a run defender, a coverage player, really good pass rusher as well. So, yeah, it's a really good linebacker class.
Who was your most impressive player here?
My favorite answer we got today was from none other than Mason Graham, who was very reserved in his podium. He actually even said, he goes, listen, I have no off-the-field stuff, nothing to hide here. I'm just all business, man, which you love to hear that. But then you got later on in the podium, and someone asked him, Mason, if I'm a general manager and I say, hey, show me 1 or 2 plays from your tape, why should I draft you? And Mason goes, you know what, just watch the Ohio State game.
Yeah.
And I was like, hell yeah, dude. Like, even when he's going to the NFL, takes one last jab at Ohio State as he's going to the league. I just, as a college guy, I'm like, dude, that rivalry just runs deep, man. I love it. Listen, we're lucky we did not see Mason Graham and Jack Sawyer at the same time at the podiums, because there might have been fisticuffs, being thrown if those two were there. But I love Mason Graham. He's all business. So is Jack Sawyer as well.
Yep.
I just love the one final jab at Ohio State. He did say, he knew they were very talented. Once they got into the playoffs, he's like, I knew they had a really good chance to make a run.
Respecting your opponent is an important part of beating your opponent.
Yes, exactly. And he does respect Ohio State, obviously, but I just love the one final jab at Ohio State.
I wasn't prepared. I didn't bring my pepper spray, so I was not prepared for any situation like that at all.
No, you brought Jack Johnson and Tom O'Leary. You had him right next to you. So you were ready if something was going to go down and you needed to get involved.
2 weapons on me at all times.
You were ready there. Appreciate everybody watching and listening to the show here on day 2. The coverage does not stop here. We will be back with you tomorrow doing the exact same thing. Appreciate everybody in the chat getting in on the show. This is so much fun when you guys sort of ask questions and get involved in the show as well. It really lights up our coverage, and we have a lot of guys that we're talking about. We have a show rundown, but obviously you guys asking some different questions, so feel free the whole week long. If there's a guy that you're saying like, hey, what'd you hear from this guy? Did you see something here? Especially when the drills get underway, let us know. Watch the shows, get involved in the chat, and let's have some fun. For Dalton Wasserman, Max Chadwick, I'm Trevor Sikkema saying thank you guys so much for watching the PFF NFL show. See you guys tomorrow.